The millionaire arrived home, and what he saw between his daughter and the cleaner changed him forever. You won't believe what he heard when he opened the door. After 3 years of absolute silence, Marcus Tan had millions in the bank, companies in 3 countries, and the financial world at his feet. But his house was a mausoleum, an enormous penthouse in Sentosa Cove, with marble floors, lamps imported from Milan, and a garden that looked straight out of a magazine. Yet, every night, the loudest echo was that of emptiness. What good is having everything if the person you love most has stopped speaking? Since the death of his wife, Sarah, in that unforeseen accident, something in the house had broken forever. But the most painful part wasn't his silence. It was his daughters. Little Li Mei, barely 3 years old, stopped uttering a single word. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't laugh. She just stared as if her voice had left with her mother. The best pediatricians said it was trauma. The most expensive child psychologists spoke of profound childhood grief. Specialized nannies tried everything. Games, therapy, music, stories. Nothing worked. Li Mei remained trapped in a world without sound. Marcus, who closed multi-million-dollar deals with a single call, couldn't get his daughter to say Papa, and that was destroying him inside. The problem wasn't just the pain, it was the guilt. He had been at a meeting the night of the accident. He always wondered if leaving earlier would have changed anything. That question haunted him like a shadow. The penthouse, once filled with laughter, was now an ice palace. The staff walked on tiptoes. No one spoke more than necessary. Even the wind seemed to ask permission to enter. But what Marcus didn't know was that destiny was already moving pieces. Far from that penthouse, in a humble HDB estate where dreams often seemed bigger than the flats, Siti Rahman folded clothes while doing calculations in an old notebook. Her ailing father needed medicine. Her younger siblings needed school supplies, and she needed a miracle. When she saw the advertisement seeking cleaning staff for a residence in the city, she knew it wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity. She didn't know that this job would change her life, nor that she would be the only one capable of breaking the most painful silence of all. Because, sometimes, it's not money that saves a family. It's a melody. And that melody was about to begin. Marcus Tan could endure endless board meetings, corporate betrayals, and million-dollar losses, but he couldn't bear his daughter's silence. Every morning, he entered Li Mei's room with the absurd hope of hearing, even a whisper, a papa, a sound, anything. But all he found was her large, sad eyes fixed on the window. Could such a small child carry such great pain? The room remained untouched since the accident. The dresses Sarah had bought still hung, perfectly aligned. The soft toys were still in the same place. Marcus hadn't allowed anything to be moved. It was as if preserving order was his desperate way of not accepting the loss. Nannies came and went, highly qualified women with international experience. Some tried structured discipline. Others opted for modern methods of emotional stimulation. One even brought professional musical instruments. Nothing worked. Li Mei simply didn't react. The house staff began to whisper that the penthouse was haunted by sadness. They didn't say it aloud, of course, but the atmosphere was heavy. The air felt cold even in Singapore's summer. Marcus started coming home later and later, not because he didn't want to see his daughter, but because he couldn't bear feeling powerless in front of her. The man who dominated markets couldn't master the silence of a 3-year-old girl. And then, one Monday morning, Siti arrived. She didn't bring university degrees or recommendations from influential families, just a small suitcase, a simple uniform, and an old guitar wrapped in a worn case. Mr. Raj, the butler, looked her up and down with obvious doubt. "We don't need musicians here," he said dryly. Siti smiled humbly. "I'm not here to sing, sir. I'm here to work." What no one knew was that the guitar wasn't an ornament. It was the only gift her mother had left her before she died. Siti had sung since she was a child. She sang while cleaning, while cooking, while crying in silence so her siblings wouldn't hear her. On the first day, Li Mei observed her from the hallway. Siti was kneeling, cleaning the floor, humming very softly, an old Malay song that spoke of stars and promises. It was barely a sound, but something changed. Li Mei moved a few steps closer. She didn't speak, but for the first time in months, she didn't seem absent. And although Siti didn't notice it at that moment, the ice began to crack, because there are wounds that science cannot heal, but the heart knows how. For the first few days, Siti kept her distance. She knew her place. She was the new cleaner, nothing more. She didn't cross boundaries, didn't ask questions, didn't offer opinions. She just worked in silence. Although her silence wasn't cold like that of the penthouse, Hers was full of life. Maid began to follow her like a small shadow. She didn't speak, didn't ask for anything, just sat on the floor while Siti cleaned and watched her with those enormous eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. Siti pretended not to notice the child's constant presence, but something hurt her inside. She had seen that look before in her own siblings when their mother died. That mix of fear and emptiness that cannot be explained. What if the child hadn't lost her voice, but the desire to use it? One afternoon, while the rest of the staff was in the kitchen, Siti finished cleaning the main living area. The penthouse was in absolute silence. She looked around and saw Maid sitting on the sofa, hugging a doll. "Do you like music?" Siti asked softly. Maid didn't answer but didn't leave. Siti hesitated for a few seconds. She knew she shouldn't get distracted, but she also knew that the heart doesn't understand employment contracts. She went up to her small staff room and came down with the old guitar. She sat on the floor, crossed her legs, and began to play a simple melody. Nothing elaborate, nothing theatrical. A children's song that spoke of a little bird that was afraid to fly until it discovered its wings had always been there. Maid raised her head. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't dramatic, but her fingers began to move to the rhythm. Siti continued singing softly, as if singing to the wind. And then something happened that no one had seen in months. Maid smiled. It was small, barely a timid gesture, but it was real. Siti felt a lump in her throat, but didn't stop singing. She didn't want to break the moment. The next day she did it again, and the next, until one afternoon, while singing the chorus, she heard something very softly, almost a whisper. Maid repeated a word from the song. Siti froze. Had it been her imagination? "Do you want to try again?" she asked, with a trembling voice. The girl looked at her intently, and this time, clearer, sang a single phrase, but enough for the world to change. And what Siti didn't know was that at that very instant, Marcus Tan had just arrived earlier than expected and was listening to everything from the hallway. Marcus Tan didn't usually arrive early. That day he did by pure chance. A meeting was cancelled. A contract was postponed. Traffic miraculously flowed. Nothing seemed extraordinary until he set foot inside the penthouse. That's when he heard it. A melody. His first impulse was to frown. Music. In his house, music had disappeared since Sarah's death. No one dared to play a song. It was an unwritten rule. He walked down the hallway with a tense brow, and then he heard it. A small, fragile voice singing. Marcus stood completely still. His briefcase fell from his hand and hit the marble with a dry sound that he didn't even register. It couldn't be. His heart began to pound violently. That voice was unmistakable. It was Maid. After 3 years of absolute silence, singing, he approached slowly, as if the slightest movement could break the spell. From the doorframe, he saw the scene he would never forget. Siti was sitting on the floor with her old guitar resting against her chest. In front of her, Maid stood, swaying slightly, as she awkwardly repeated the last phrase of the song with childish clumsiness. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't strong, but it was a voice, and that changed everything. Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since his wife's funeral. Tears burned in his eyes. How was it possible? Doctors, therapies, renowned specialists. Nothing had achieved what this young woman in a simple uniform and worn guitar had accomplished in silence. Who was she? Maid sang again, this time clearer. And then something even more powerful happened. The girl looked at Siti and laughed. A small, unaccustomed laugh. Rusty with time, but a laugh nonetheless. Marcus put a hand to his chest as if he couldn't breathe. For years he had tried to buy solutions, and now he understood something devastating. Love cannot be bought. Siti, without noticing she was being observed, gently hugged the girl when the song ended. "You did amazing, champion," she whispered. Marcus felt something inside him break, but not from pain. It was the ice. For the first time since Sarah's death, the penthouse didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt alive. But what Marcus didn't know was that this miracle would have consequences. Because when a heart beats again, desires also awaken. And where light is born, there is always someone willing to extinguish it. Victoria Lim was not accustomed to having anything taken from her. Daughter of an influential Singaporean family, elegant, calculating, and perfectly educated to move among tycoons and politicians, she had always known her destiny, to marry a powerful man and consolidate an even larger empire. And Marcus Tan was the perfect piece. Their engagement had not been born of love, it had been born of convenience. After Sarah's death, their families considered it best for emotional and social stability, a strategic alliance disguised as support. But something was changing. Victoria noticed it the same night. Marcus came to dinner earlier than usual. He didn't seem distant. He seemed different. There was something in his gaze, something that wasn't there before. "You look troubled," she commented, as she put her wine glass on the table. "Just a long day," he replied, avoiding elaborating. But that's not what caught Victoria's attention. It was that in the middle of dinner, May appeared in the living room and hummed. The sound was soft, barely perceptible, but enough. Victoria stiffened. "Did she just?" she murmured. Marcus didn't answer with words. He just nodded, containing his emotion. Victoria forced a smile. "What good news," she said in a measured tone. But inside, something ignited. Because May hadn't reacted in years, and now, suddenly, she was making sounds again. Who had caused that change? She soon found out. One of the maids commented almost enthusiastically that the new cleaner had an angelic touch with the child, that ever since Siti sang in the house, the atmosphere was different. The name resonated in Victoria's mind like a warning. Siti, a helper, an unknown, a woman without an influential surname, and yet responsible for something that not even she, the future wife, had achieved. That night, as Marcus watched his daughter draw with new attention, Victoria looked at him and saw something that deeply disturbed her. Admiration, not for her, but for someone else. Since when did an employee have that power? Victoria didn't believe in coincidences. She believed in threats. And what had begun as a simple change in the child began to feel like the beginning of a loss. She wasn't going to allow it, because Victoria Lim didn't lose her place, much less to someone who cleaned floors. Since that afternoon when he heard May sing, Marcus was not the same. He tried to convince himself that it was all gratitude, just that. Gratitude towards the young woman who had achieved the impossible. But every time Siti walked down the hallway in her simple uniform and that inexplicable serenity, something inside him stirred. He watched her without her noticing, how she bent down to May's height to speak to her, how she celebrated each new word as if it were a treasure, how she never tried to stand out but shone anyway. Since when did the penthouse feel warmer? May no longer stayed locked in her room. Now she came down to the kitchen, drew in the living room. She even began to say complete sentences, though still timidly. Each word was a silent victory. One afternoon, Marcus found Siti teaching her a new song. "Little birds are not afraid," Siti sang with a smile. "Not afraid," May repeated more firmly. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. For years he had sought solutions in luxurious offices, in private clinics, in exclusive therapies, and the answer was sitting on the floor with an old guitar and worn shoes. "Thank you," he suddenly said, breaking the moment. Siti quickly stood up, lowering her gaze. "I'm just doing my job, sir." But Marcus knew it wasn't true. That wasn't just work, that was love. And that's where the danger began. Because that same day, Victoria arrived unannounced. She entered the penthouse with her characteristic elegance, impeccable dress, expensive perfume, measured smile, but her eyes were alert. She heard May's laughter from the hallway, and it wasn't a small laugh. It was clear, free. Victoria stopped dead. She entered the living room just as Siti was finishing the song. May applauded excitedly. "Well, what a domestic scene," Victoria said in a sharp tone. The atmosphere changed instantly. Siti took a step back. May frowned. Marcus felt the tension. "I didn't know we were now organizing concerts in the main living room," Victoria continued, her gaze sweeping over the worn guitar. "Is it part of the cleaning service?" Siti lowered her head but replied with respect. "The child wanted to listen to music, ma'am." Victoria smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Of course, though I suppose we must remember everyone's role in this house." Silence. Marcus took a step forward. "Victoria, enough." It was subtle, but it was firm, and that hurt more than any words, because for the first time, Marcus was not on her side. May, clinging to Siti's skirt, whispered, "Don't scold her." Victoria felt the dagger directly to her pride, the child defending the helper. That wasn't just an emotional threat, it was an invasion, and in Victoria's mind, a cold decision began to form. If Siti was the reason for the change, Siti would be the problem to eliminate. Marcus didn't know it yet, but he was not only beginning to admire a woman who didn't belong to his world, he was starting a silent war. And wars in high society are not won with songs. They are won by destroying reputations. Marcus began to change small habits without realizing it. Before, he would have breakfast alone in his study. Now he would casually come down to the kitchen. At the same time, Siti was preparing fruit for May. He said it was a coincidence, but it wasn't. The house no longer felt like a frozen museum in time. There were soft laughs, Small steps running down the hallway, songs floating up the stairs, and each of those signs had a clear origin: Siti. But Marcus didn't want to admit what was happening. Was it possible to feel something again after having buried the love of his life? One afternoon, while Maid was napping, Siti was in the garden, hanging small clothes on a discreet clothesline she had improvised. The wind moved her hair. The light of the setting sun enveloped her with an almost ethereal warmth. Marcus watched her from the terrace. He didn't see the employee. He saw the woman. A young, simple woman, with hands marked by work, but with a delicacy not learned in any university. A woman who didn't try to impress anyone, and nevertheless was disarming him. "You don't have to do that," he said, coming down to the garden. Siti started. "Sorry, sir. Hanging clothes outside. There are industrial dryers." She barely smiled. "The sun leaves a nicer smell, and Maid sleeps better when her clothes smell of clean air." Marcus remained silent. He had never thought of anything like that. He solved problems with money, she with details. "How do you do it?" he asked suddenly. "Do what?" "Make her live again." Siti lowered her gaze. "I didn't do anything special. I just listened to her. Sometimes children don't need doctors. They need someone to be patient with them." That word struck him hard. Patience. Marcus had tried to rush his daughter's grief, force progress, buy solutions. Siti just sat and waited. "You love her very much," she added softly. "It shows. But love also needs time." The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was different, closer, more human. Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. For the first time, someone wasn't speaking to him as the powerful businessman. They were speaking to him as a father, and that moved him more than any praise. From the second-floor window, someone was watching. Victoria had gone to look for Marcus to discuss wedding details, which was supposed to take place in 6 months. But what she saw was not a work conversation. She saw proximity. She saw softness. She saw something she had never seen in him when he was with her, and she understood. The danger was not just the connection with the child, it was the connection with the man. Victoria was not naive. She knew how to read glances, and Marcus's was no longer empty. It was awakening. That night, during the formal dinner they shared, Victoria spoke with feigned sweetness. "Marcus, I think we should accelerate the wedding date. It's not good to prolong engagements." Siti, who was serving water at that moment, felt the air change. Maid stopped eating. Marcus didn't answer immediately. For the first time, he hesitated, and that doubt was enough. Because when a powerful man begins to question a decision that seemed definitive, it is because his heart has already chosen another path. Victoria squeezed her glass tightly. If Siti had brought music to the house, she would bring silence back. And this time, it would not be an innocent silence. It would be an imposed silence. The penthouse woke up in chaos. It wasn't a noisy chaos. It was an elegant but venomous one. Victoria had organized a small private event the night before. Nothing ostentatious, just a few influential friends, expensive wine, and strategic conversations. Marcus had attended out of obligation. Siti had kept to herself, performing her duties without interfering. But the next morning, Victoria came downstairs with a pale face and a voice filled with indignation. "My jewelry is missing." The comment dropped like a stone in still water. Mr. Raj, the butler, was the first to react. "Are you sure, miss?" "Absolutely. My grandmother's emerald necklace disappeared. That necklace was no ordinary accessory. It was an antique piece of high economic value and even greater symbolic value." The staff was gathered in the main living room. Siti was among them, confused. Marcus came down seconds later. "What's going on?" Victoria approached him with contained drama. "I've been robbed." Silence. Glances began to cross. The atmosphere grew heavy. "Who had access to the dressing room last night?" Marcus asked in a firm tone. Mr. Raj mentally reviewed. "The usual staff, sir, and the new helper was cleaning the second-floor hallway." Glances slowly turned to Siti. She felt the blow without anyone touching her. I didn't enter any dressing room," she said, her voice trembling but dignified. Victoria took a step forward. "What a coincidence that the necklace disappears just when someone new arrives, don't you think, Marcus?" The accusation wasn't direct. It was worse. It was planted. Maid, who was sitting on the sofa with a book, looked up. "No," she said with unexpected clarity. Everyone froze. The girl walked towards Siti and took her hand. "She doesn't steal." That phrase struck like lightning. Marcus felt a deep pride in his daughter's firmness. but also a growing pressure. The situation was delicate. If he ignored the accusation, it would seem like favoritism. If he acted harshly, he would destroy something that was just beginning to grow. Victoria took advantage of the silence. "Of course, I don't want to make accusations without proof," she said with false nobility. "But perhaps the right thing to do is call the police, just to clarify things." Siti pallid. She had no record, no influence. She came from a background where an accusation could mark an entire family. "Sir, I would never touch something that isn't mine," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "You can check my things. You can check everything." That look wasn't fear. It was honesty. Marcus held her gaze for a few seconds that seemed eternal. Could he believe her over his fiancé? Victoria noticed the doubt and smiled inwardly, because that was her goal, to sow distrust. The police were called. The search began. Siti's heart pounded. But she didn't lower her head. Maid didn't let go of her hand. And just when it seemed the scandal would be inevitable, a security officer rushed in. "Sir, we found something." Victoria immediately turned. "Where?" "In the event hall, under a side table. The necklace was there." Absolute silence. Marcus looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at the floor for just a second, enough to reveal discomfort. "How strange," she murmured. "Someone must have moved it last night." But no one thought the same anymore. The accusation had been clear, and the intention too. Siti didn't cry, she just took a deep breath. But something changed in Marcus. Because now he not only admired the woman who had saved his daughter, now he also respected her dignity in the face of humiliation. And when respect mixes with gratitude, love soon appears. Victoria knew it instantly. She had attacked and failed, but she wasn't going to stop, because in her world, battles are won by attrition, and this was just beginning. The house returned to calm, at least in appearance. The police left. The staff returned to their duties. Victoria locked herself in her room with an elegant excuse, but the air was no longer the same. Something had fractured. Marcus couldn't get the image of Siti standing in the middle of the living room, unjustly accused, yet dignified, out of his head. That night, when the penthouse fell silent, he gently knocked on the door of the staff room. Siti opened it. Her eyes were red, but her posture remained firm. "May I come in?" he asked. She hesitated for a second, then nodded. The room was small, a simple bed, a modest table, the guitar leaning against the wall. There were no luxuries, no pretensions, just honesty. Marcus felt strange inside. It was the first time he had entered such a simple space within his own home. "I'm sorry for what happened," he finally said. "I shouldn't have let the situation go so far." Siti lowered her gaze. "I understand you had to protect your fiancé." That word fiancé weighed heavily. Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm not sure what I should protect anymore." The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones. It wasn't awkward. It was electric. "Sir," Siti began. "Marcus," he corrected gently. She looked up. That small detail broke an invisible barrier. "Marcus, I don't want to cause problems. If my presence is inconvenient, I can leave." That possibility struck him harder than any accusation. "No," he replied without thinking. "Maid needs you." But deep down, he knew it wasn't just Maid. He needed her. "When they accused you," he continued, "I didn't doubt you for a second." Siti's eyes shone. "That means more than you can imagine." A distant thunder rumbled outside. The rain began to fall, softly hitting the window. The atmosphere became even more intimate. "Why are you still so strong?" he asked. "Anyone in your place would have cried, screamed." She smiled sadly. "Because I learned that when you're poor, you can't afford to lose your dignity." That phrase pierced him. Marcus took another step closer, too close. He could smell her simple perfume. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't sophisticated, but it was warm, real. For the first time in years, his heart beat with nervousness. "Siti, ever since you arrived, this house has breathed again." She held his gaze, and at that instant, there was no longer a businessman or an employee, only two wounded people finding solace. Marcus slowly raised his hand, hesitating for a second before brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was soft, respectful, but charged with meaning. Siti closed her eyes for an instant, and the world seemed to stop until a sound interrupted everything. A slight creak in the hallway. Both turned towards the door. No one was visible, but someone had been there. And that someone wasn't going to let the story advance so easily, because when love begins to declare itself, hatred also becomes more dangerous. Yes, someone was in the hallway, and it was no coincidence. Victoria Lim didn't believe in coincidences. She believed in surveillance. She had noticed Marcus's distance, the way he avoided talking about the wedding, the way his gaze sought Siti, even when he pretended not to. So, that night, she decided to confirm what she already suspected, and she saw it. She didn't hear every word, but she saw enough. The closeness, the tension, the way he pronounced her name. That was enough. Victoria didn't scream, didn't make a scene. It wasn't her style. She smiled and began to think, because destroying someone doesn't always require immediate scandal. Sometimes it's done with surgical precision. The next morning, Victoria called a trusted contact, a man accustomed to discreetly solving problems. "I need information about someone," she said softly. "Siti Rahman. She comes from a humble HDB estate. I want to know everything. Family, debts, past, everything. If she didn't find a flaw, she would fabricate one." Meanwhile, in the penthouse, Marcus seemed more determined than ever. He had breakfast with May and Siti at the same table. They laughed. The child recounted a dream, something unthinkable months ago, but Victoria observed, and when a powerful woman feels displaced, she doesn't compete, she attacks. 2 days later, the blow came. A man in a dark suit appeared at the door. He claimed to represent a local financial institution from Siti's estate. "We're here for an outstanding debt from your father, Ensik Rahman," he informed in a firm tone. "If it's not settled within 72 hours, we will proceed legally." Siti froze. "That can't be. We're paying in installments." The man showed documents, accumulated interest, penalties, impossible figures. Marcus frowned. "Why come all the way here? We were informed that Miss Rahman now works in a high-end residence." We assumed she could respond. The humiliation was subtle but cruel. Siti felt the ground open beneath her feet. That information was not public. Someone had sought it out. Someone had sent it. That same afternoon, she received another blow, a call from the general hospital. Her father had worsened. He needed an urgent procedure, money she didn't have. Marcus, upon hearing, acted without hesitation. "I'll cover the expenses," he said firmly. Siti shook her head, tears held back. "I can't accept that. It's not charity, it's help. And you helped my daughter when no one else could." But accepting meant something more. It meant dependence. And Victoria knew it. From her room, observing every movement, she understood that the plan was working. Financial pressure, emotional vulnerability, potential scandal. If Siti accepted the money, she would be accused of being an opportunist. If she rejected it, she would lose her father. It was a perfect move, or so she thought, because Victoria was forgetting something fundamental. Siti was not weak, and Marcus was no longer the cold man who only protected his family name. That night, Siti made a decision. She would not run. She would not leave. But neither would she allow herself to be bought. And when a humble woman decides to defend the little she has, she can be more dangerous than any millionaire. What Victoria didn't imagine was that her own game was about to turn against her. Siti didn't sleep that night. The call from the hospital kept repeating in her head like a cruel echo. Her father needed the procedure as soon as possible. The figures were impossible, the deadlines unfair, and her pride heavy. By dawn, she had made a decision. She went down to the kitchen with the small suitcase she had brought on the first day, the same one, as if destiny was closing a circle. Marcus found her there. "I'm going to the estate," she said bluntly. "My father is serious." She didn't ask for help. She didn't explain too much. She just spoke like someone used to facing storms alone. Marcus watched her in silence. That firmness moved him and desperate him at the same time. "I'll take you," he replied. "It's not necessary. It's not negotiable." It wasn't the tone of the businessman. It was that of a man no longer willing to stand by. May appeared at the door with disheveled hair and still sleepy eyes. "Are you leaving?" she asked. And her voice was no longer that of a broken child. Siti knelt to hug her. "Just a few days, princess." The girl shook her head and hugged tighter. "Not alone." And that small phrase sealed everything. Hours later, Marcus drove on roads he had never traveled. They left behind the elegant city, the glass buildings, the wide avenues. The asphalt became uneven, then dirt, then dust. Siti looked out the window in silence. She wasn't ashamed, nor proud, just focused. "You don't have to do this," she murmured after a while. "Yes, I do." She looked at him, asking no more. When they arrived, the contrast was brutal. Low-rise flats, unpainted walls, neighbors who greeted with curiosity, no trace of the luxury. Marcus had considered normal his whole life. And yet, there was something different. People knew each other by name, helped each other without cameras. They looked each other in the eye. They entered Siti's small flat. Her father, Ensik Rahman, was in a simple bed, thinner than Marcus expected, but his eyes were firm, proud. "Papa," Siti whispered. The man took her hand, then looked at Marcus, not with distrust, but with evaluation. "Thank you for bringing her," he said in a weak but clear voice. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask for explanations. He just held his gaze. And Marcus understood something in that instant. This family didn't need pity. They needed respect. The local doctor explained the procedure with direct simplicity. There was no advanced technology, no hospital luxuries, only urgency. Marcus went out to the void deck for a moment, took out his phone, made 2 calls. But this time it was different. He didn't speak like a magnate. He spoke like a man. He paid for the procedure in Siti's name, without visible transfers from his companies, without publicity, without condition. When he returned, she looked at him as if she already knew. "I didn't want you to feel like I was buying you," he said before she spoke. "I'm just giving back something you gave me." "And what did I give you?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Hope." The procedure was performed that same afternoon in a modest clinic in the nearby town. Siti didn't let go of her father's hand for a second. Marcus stayed in the waiting room, thinking about the cold penthouse, Lime's recent laughter, Siti's look when she defended her dignity. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about contracts. He was thinking about family. Hours later, the doctor came out. It was successful. "Now it depends on the rest." Siti burst into tears, not discreet, not restrained, real. And Marcus held her, not as a boss, not as a benefactor, but as someone who could no longer imagine his life without her. That night they sat in the courtyard of the HDB block. The sky was full of stars that were never seen in the city. Siti took out her guitar, played a soft melody, not to impress, but to thank. Marcus watched her under the dim light and knew. Love had not arrived with fireworks. It had arrived slowly, with patience, with dignity, with music. And he understood something that would change everything that came next. If he wanted to protect what they were building, he would have to confront whoever tried to destroy it, because returning to Singapore, nothing would ever be the same. The return to Sentosa Cove was not tranquil. The drive back was filled with silences that were no longer awkward, but decisive. Siti looked at the horizon. Marcus drove with a clear mind for the first time in years. It wasn't just love he felt, it was certainty. Upon arriving at the penthouse, something felt different. Too much order, too much silence. "Mr. Raj, the butler, greeted him with an expression he couldn't hide. "Sir, we need to talk." Marcus put his briefcase on the floor. They entered the study. Mr. Raj carefully closed the door. "It's not my place to interfere in personal matters. But what happened with Miss Siti's father's death was no coincidence." Siti felt a chill. Marcus didn't blink. "Explain." The day before the supposed debt collector came, Miss Victoria received a man in the private lounge. I announced him myself. Then I saw him leave with documents in hand. Silence, dense, irrefutable. Siti lowered her gaze, but not from shame, from confirmation. Marcus clenched his fists. It wasn't just jealousy. It wasn't just wounded pride. It was manipulation. And that, in his world, was unforgivable. He went upstairs without announcing himself. He found Victoria in the dressing room trying on a new dress. She looked at herself in the mirror before speaking. "You returned. Soon. You manipulated Siti's father's debt. No pleasantries, no courtesies." Victoria held her reflection for a few more seconds before slowly turning. "I warned you that woman would bring problems. Don't respond with evasions." "What did you expect me to do, Marcus?" Her voice lost its rehearsed sweetness. "Sit by while a helper steals your judgment?" He took a step forward. "She didn't steal anything from me. She's pulling you away from your position, your family name, your world." "My world," he replied with dangerous calm, "stopped making sense 3 years ago." Victoria looked at him for the first time without her mask. "You're going to ruin your reputation for a woman without lineage?" "She's not without lineage. She's without money. And there's a huge difference." That phrase was an elegant slap. Victoria laughed in disbelief. "Don't be naive. Society doesn't forgive such decisions. Then let them not forgive me." Silence. The tension was almost visible. "I'm canceling the wedding," he finally said. The dress fell from Victoria's hands. "You can't do this to me!" "I can't marry someone who tries to destroy the person who saved my daughter." Victoria approached, desperate for the first time. Do you think she loves you? She loves what you represent. Marcus held her with a firm gaze. She was the only one who didn't see what I represent. She saw who I am. That was the definitive defeat. That night, the announcement was formal. Influential families found out. Rumors began to circulate. Calls soon followed. Marcus didn't answer any. Siti, however, felt the weight. This is too big, she whispered in the kitchen. I don't want to be the cause of your war. You're not the cause, he replied. You're the reason. But although the engagement was cancelled, the social damage was already in motion. Comments at private dinners, invitations that stopped arriving, glances that changed. Victoria didn't make a public scandal. She did something worse. She dropped insinuations. Marcus lost his head. An opportunistic helper. A poorly managed emotional crisis. The pressure began to surround the penthouse like fog. And it was then that Siti understood something painful. It wasn't just about love. It was about resilience. Because loving a powerful man wasn't the challenge. The challenge was enduring the world that came with him. That night, as Maid slept, hugging her favorite doll, Siti watched the house in silence. She had given that child her voice back. She had given that man hope back. But perhaps the price would be too high. And in her heart, a decision began to form, one that would break more than any accusation. The rumors started as whispers and within days became constant echoes. At business meetings, Marcus noticed the glances, comments disguised as concern, unsolicited advice. It's not prudent to mix emotions with reputation. Your daughter needs stability, not scandals. Society is watching, Marcus. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of losing contracts. He was afraid of losing Siti. However, Siti did fear something. She feared becoming the reason Maid would suffer again. One afternoon, while helping the child color in the garden, she unintentionally overheard a conversation between two new maids hired through external recommendations. They say she'll be dismissed soon. It's obvious. Those types of women always try to climb the ladder. The words weren't loud, but they were poison. Siti pretended not to hear. Maid looked up. What's climbing the ladder? Siti forced a smile. Nothing important, princess. But it was. That night, Marcus found her on the terrace, looking at the distant city lights. You're distant, he said. I'm thinking. Don't do it alone. She took a deep breath. Your world is big, Marcus. Powerful, demanding. I don't belong in it. I don't want you to belong in that world. I want you to be in mine. It's the same. Silence. He took another step closer. I'm not going to give you up because of comments. They're not just comments, she replied in a firm voice. They're consequences. Today they talk about me, tomorrow they'll talk about Maid. That stopped him. Siti looked him directly in the eyes. I can bear being called opportunistic. I can bear having my past questioned, but I cannot allow your daughter to feel singled out again because of me. The pain in her voice wasn't dramatic. It was truth. You're not a fault, he whispered. No, but I am a conflict. And it was then that she said what was hardest for her. I'm leaving. The word fell like a dry blow. No, Marcus responded immediately. Yes, because if I stay, you will always be choosing me against the world, and that will wear you down, and one day you will look at me with resentment. Never, he said now. She took a step back. I love you, she finally confessed. With tears, she didn't hide. But love is also knowing when to step aside. That confession broke the last barrier. Marcus held her by the shoulders. Don't save me by losing yourself. But Siti had already made her decision. That same dawn, she packed her bag. She didn't wake Maid. She didn't want to see her cry. She just left a letter on Marcus's desk. When he woke up and found her room empty, something inside him collapsed. The letter was simple. Thank you for teaching me that love can exist even in houses of ice, but your daughter needs peace more than passion, and I need to leave before the world turns me into something I'm not. Marcus ran downstairs. Too late. The penthouse returned to silence, but not the cold silence of the past. This was a silence of conscious loss. Maid woke up and looked for Siti. Where is she? Marcus didn't know how to respond. That afternoon, the girl didn't sing, didn't laugh, didn't speak much, and that's when he understood the hardest lesson. Protecting someone doesn't always mean letting them go. Sometimes it means fighting for them, even if the whole world looks at you wrongly. Marcus entered the study, looked at the paintings, the contracts, the symbols of power he had accumulated his whole life. What good were they now? He picked up his phone, canceled 2 meetings, ignored 3 calls, and made a decision that would change the end of the story. He wouldn't let Siti sacrifice herself alone, because this time, he wasn't going to stand by and watch love leave because of fear. This time, he was going to choose. And when a man who always chose power decides to choose his heart, nothing ever remains the same. Marcus didn't inform anyone. He didn't call his driver, didn't prepare a speech, didn't ask for advice. He just took his car keys and left before fear could convince him to stay. The road to the HDB heartland no longer seemed distant. This time it wasn't unknown territory. It was the place where he had understood what truly mattered. As he drove, the words of Siti's letter repeated in his mind. Your daughter needs peace more than passion. She was wrong. Maid didn't need empty peace. She needed brave love. Upon arriving at the estate, he didn't go straight to the flat. He asked for her. A neighbor pointed towards the community park. She's giving music lessons to the children. That made him smile. He found her under the shade of a large tree, surrounded by small children sitting on the ground. Her guitar rested on her lap. She was singing a simple song, and the children repeated it with laughter. There was no sadness on her face. There was light. But when she looked up and saw him, the world seemed to stop. The song unraveled on her lips. The children began to murmur. Marcus walked towards her without looking around, without measuring consequences. I asked you not to come, Siti said softly when he stood before her. And I asked you not to leave. Silence. The children watched with curiosity. You can't fix this with impulses, she added. I didn't come to fix anything. I came to tell you I was wrong, she frowned. About what? About letting you carry the decision alone. I thought protecting you was respecting your sacrifice, but all I did was show you that the world still dictates my life. Siti looked at him, her heart pounding. Marcus. He took a deep breath, and then he did something he had never done in his life. He knelt before her, not for show, but out of conviction. A murmur spread through the park. I don't need a woman from my lineage, he said in a clear voice. I need the woman who gave my daughter her voice, and my home its life. Siti felt her legs tremble. I can't give you social peace of mind, he continued. I can't promise there won't be criticism, but I can promise you'll never face anything alone again. His eyes were moist. Not from weakness, from truth. I love you, Siti. Not for what you did for Maid, not for what you represent. I love you for who you are when no one is watching. The silence was absolute. The entire estate seemed to hold its breath. Siti thought of the penthouse, the glances, the rumors, the child who had learned to sing again. She also thought of her father, who had taught her that dignity is not fleeing, it is choosing with courage. And if the world doesn't accept us, she asked, then we'll build a new one. That phrase broke the last barrier. Siti dropped the guitar to one side, knelt before him, and kissed him. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale kiss. It was a kiss with tears, with fear, with decision. The children applauded without fully understanding, but feeling the emotion. At that moment, a car stopped at the estate entrance. Maid got out, running. Siti! The girl threw herself into her arms. Don't go again! Siti hugged her tightly, looked at Marcus, and knew that it was no longer just a love story between two adults. It was a family that had chosen to fight. Marcus stood up and took both their hands. He wasn't defeating society. He was ceasing to live for it, and that was the real victory. The penthouse was no longer the same. Not because the furniture changed, not because there were new decorations, but because silence ceased to own the walls. Marcus didn't organize an ostentatious wedding. There were no magazines, no exclusive guest lists, no strategic alliances. There was something much more important: truth. The ceremony was in the back garden of the house, under the same tree where Maid had first spoken after her trauma. That place had history. It had meaning. Siti didn't wear a designer dress. She wore a simple, white, elegant gown, without pretension, her hair loose, her smile honest. Marcus also didn't wear his usual imposing suit, just a classic suit, without arrogance, without social shield. The guests were few. Siti's father, now recovered, was in the front row, chest high, proud. Maid held the old guitar. Yes, the same one, the one that had started everything. When it was time for the vows, Marcus didn't read anything prepared by advisors. He spoke from the heart. I spent years believing that power meant controlling everything, but I learned that true power is allowing yourself to be changed, and you changed me. Siti held his gaze. I grew up thinking I had to accept what life gave me without asking for more. But with you, I learned that I can also choose, and I choose you. It wasn't a noisy declaration. It was firm. When Maid began to play the guitar with Siti's help, the emotion was inevitable. The child sang clearly, confidently, happily. The voice that had once disappeared now filled the garden. Marcus closed his eyes for an instant. He remembered that afternoon when he heard her singing from the hallway. He remembered the briefcase falling to the floor. He remembered the ice breaking and fully understood the question that had accompanied him from the beginning. What good is having the world at your feet if your home is empty of love? He had millions, he had companies, he had prestige, but none of those things had achieved what a humble woman with an old guitar accomplished because he had money. But she had the melody that opened his heart, and he chose the melody. Over time, the rumors faded. Those who criticized grew tired. Those who observed understood. Society always finds a new topic to murmur about, but true happiness does not need approval. The penthouse ceased to be an ice palace. It became a home, with laughter, with music, with small arguments and long hugs. And every time Marcus came home from work, he no longer felt the weight of the empire. He felt the warmth of his family. Because love does not understand social classes, it understands courage. And sometimes the person who seems to arrive to clean your house is the one who comes to cleanse your soul. If this story touched your heart, if you ever doubted between pride and love, if you believed that money could buy everything and discovered that it's not true, remember this: the greatest wealth is not in what you possess. It is in who manages to give you back your life when you thought all was lost. And now we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you are listening to this channel from, what city or country you are joining us from today. We love knowing how far these stories reach. And if you believe that brave love still exists, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and join us for the next story that might change your heart. Because perhaps the next melody is waiting for you.